Hey, what's up YouTube slash all of you watching this vid? Thanks for stopping by. Anyway, I've been thinking about this for the past couple months and I felt like it was time to actually look into what matters more in Destiny when it comes to the weapon sandbox. When Beyond Light came out, and even Shadowkeep for that matter, a lot of questions were raised about why these fall expansions came with such a small amount of gear compared to past expansions of Destiny's golden era. Mainly the Taken King from Destiny 1 and Forsaken. Throughout the past year, the trend continued and each season came with only a few new things. While a few were pretty good, like Dire Promise or Old Fashioned in Dawn or Almighty, some were even really good, like the reintroduction of the Ikelos SMG and Warmind cells. A large portion of the weapons, however, that came out during the past several seasons were forgotten as the quality was severely lacking. Like, what is Widow's Bite and why was it ever introduced? This thing is basically useless. So, what matters more in Destiny? The quality or quantity? Just a quick reminder, these two aren't mutually exclusive, so there is a minimum level to each of these no matter which side you look at. This is also going to be focused on the PvE side of things when I reference what good perks are, for example. But this applies to weapon rolls geared more towards PvP as well. Now, just to explain what each means in relation to weapons in Destiny, I've interpreted the quality of a weapon as primarily about what sort of perk selection it has, and it's more than just, does it have rampage? For a weapon to be deemed well designed, it should have a variety of perk combinations that can change how effective or ineffective it becomes in certain situations. But it also just needs to be good overall. No point using the weapon if it just sucks, right? A lot of archetypes are avoided due to how they play from a base level. No perks involved. A is better than B, so why would I use B? This has become a more recent trend with just this past season, as not only was the activity a drag to play, the weapons were beyond subpar as well. And I'm talking about Wrathborn hunts here. Quantity is a bit simpler to explain. This is just the overall weapon pool and variety that comes from new seasons and expansions. Beyond Light came along with a rather limited selection of weapons, which kinda sucked. For the big expansion of the year, we've come to expect a certain level of new things that come out with it. And everything since Opulence, which was just a season, as hard as that is to believe, has just sort of fell flat in that department. It feels as though it's one or the other as to what we get for each expansion or season. Sometimes we get 5 new weapons and 2 are pretty good. Others we get 15 or so and there's 2 that have good PvE rolls and 1 with a PvP roll, like Rangefinder Rampage on a 120 hand cannon. What happens with those new weapons that come out and aren't used? They don't have any good rolls to go for, or maybe they have some okay ones, but it's a 180 hand cannon which isn't truly competitive with other better archetypes with the same potential perk combos. I can't speak for anyone else, but I legitimately cannot think of a single time I chose to use one of those weapons that essentially just filled a loot pool. Why go through the effort of carefully designing a brand new weapon for it to be completely avoided by a large portion of the player base just due to the fact that the perk selection is awful? If the best combo on an adaptive grenade launcher is field prep and demo, I'm not using it when I can use another with autoloading at full court, for example. Or another one, take Friction Fire, a 600 RPM SMG, which approximately has an average DPS of 3,875, with Threat Detector and Rampage as the absolute best perk combination to get, versus the new Extraordinary Rendition from the Battlegrounds activity, a 750 RPM SMG which has an average DPS of 4,591. With several great rolls, I'll just pick Outlaw and One for All, but there's plenty more. So not only do you just get a flat out better SMG with more damage per second from using Rendition, but you also get a better perk pool with more variety. Options like Overflow and Frenzy as another PvE role, but you also have multi-kill clip and Rampage in the second column. That's 4 good perks in a column of 6. If I'm choosing to use one of these weapons to go grind for, and then use in a day 1 or GM, because that's really all endgame is, I will pick Rendition 10 times out of 10. So what does that mean for Friction Fire or others like it? I've essentially stated that due to how it performs and its subpar perk combinations, it basically doesn't exist. This is where the quality of a weapon will always outshine the quantity of several weapons, unless that specific weapon can't be used in activity that you need barrier or overload for, but from a more broad view, that doesn't apply. In my mind, there isn't a reason to create a weapon if it is so heavily outperformed by its peers to the point where it isn't really even used. There are two main categories that can be used to analyze what a weapon brings to the table. First is, what exactly is it? This includes the weapon type, like scout rifle or Hanking, as well as the archetype. So a rapid fire scout, a lightweight SMG, or an adaptive auto. Each of these weapons will be unique based off how much damage they put out, how they shoot, their fire rate, etc. The subcategory of this is the archetype, which offers a slight variance to the weapon family. Autos, for example, have 4 subtypes with, once again, differing damage output, fire rate, even some intrinsic differences such as recoil directions. The second category would be the perk selection offered to it, which is arguably even more impactful to its performance than the weapon itself. Just take Recluse or Wendigo as an example. Yes, these are both pinnacle weapons, but adaptive GLs were terrible even during Wendigo's reign as king, and that is solely due to the fact that it had explosive light and the others didn't. For a weapon to be perfectly designed and well received by the community, it needs to be the right weapon type and have the best perks available, ideally with enough in the pool to provide many possibilities of roles within one weapon, without being a Stars and Shadow, which has a staggering 12 in each column. 144 different perk combos is a bit much. 4 to 6 is probably ideal to provide enough variance without making it so improbable to ever get the role you want. But Stars is an example of a weapon with a lot of quality and potential at that, just executed a bit poorly. Stars isn't a great PvE primary weapon for damage dealing, as it's on the lower side with an average DPS of 2720. Give that potential to a rapid fire auto rifle at 3900 DPS and you've nailed both categories. A weapon like that on paper would be one of the best in the game with a role like Subsistence and One for All or Frenzy. Jeesh, that would be fun to use. Anyway, this is really just to prove that weapons that suffer in one or both of these categories tend to be left behind and become more of an annoyance than anything else. We've all been there before where we're grinding for hours trying to get this specific weapon roll, and most of the time you complete that activity and you get another trash weapon that you never wanted and never will want until Bungie eventually 2 years down the road buff it to be pretty decent. Actually, Stars is another good example of why weapon quantity is so desperately needed in a loot-based game. It'd be much better to spread the wealth in this case and create 3 unique pulse rifles using the different archetypes. Let's say an adaptive, a high impact, which we'd keep as Stars in game, and an aggressive, which is the 4-round burst one. Maybe make each their own element so there'd be all 3, or make one a kinetic so there's a new pulse in both the kinetic and energy slot. The perk pools could be the same too for all of them, or be slightly different for variety, but since they're all different archetypes, I personally don't see an issue in them sharing the same perk pool. Throw in a couple PvP perks like Surplus and Killing Wind on each side, then a few other solid options, Outlaw, One for All, Rampage, you know. By the way, this same issue is with Xenoclast 2 or any of the other large perk pool weapons. It's just, in this case for Xenoclast, a special instead. Same thing would apply for 2. There are way too many perks on one gun to ever reliably get the role you want, while also completely diminishing the variety of weapons by throwing all of this onto one gun. There shouldn't ever be issues where in the current sandbox there is not one single void hand cannon to use as it was during Beyond Light. The sandbox needs to be diverse enough to accommodate all of the weapon types that Bungie created. Like, they decided to make 3 elements, then all the weapons, and then all of the subtypes. A major expansion should cover most of these weapons for the year, while the seasons introduce new ones throughout the year to sort of fill the gaps. A lot of nothing is still nothing, which is why I view the quality of the weapons introduced to be one of the most important things when going into a new season. At the beginning of every new season, the first thing I do is go to light.gg and look at all of the new weapons and what they can roll, because that's going to determine how much I put into playing that season. I basically didn't even touch Wrathborn hunts during season 12. They weren't a good activity whatsoever, but one thing that really disinterested myself, and I'm sure plenty of you, is that the weapons from it were just as terrible. The Waveframe grenade launcher was pretty cool with Ambitious Assassin, but that's it, really. The only reason I kept any of those other weapons was for the Tramps, which I didn't end up even doing. Now if you say to me, hey Cruz, we know this activity is kinda not so great, but we threw in some really good weapons and a unique perk that can only roll on these Wrathborn weapons, I would without a doubt be more interested in playing the activity. Even though it still sucks, the weapons are worth it. This is where the quality is needed. Bungie introduces these new weapons each season, and frankly most of the time, or at least I'd say half the time, no one really cares because they just suck. I will gladly stick with my Ikelos SMG that is blowing everything to smithereens over this terrible scout that can't one-shot a Taken Thrall in Last Wish. Like, come on. When the weapon quantity is satisfied with weapons that also have some semblance of quality, the amount of stuff can be overwhelmingly satisfying to see and earn. I'd argue that quantity in that aspect is more important throughout the year because seeing a lot more eye candy, let's call it, is going to bring more excitement to a new season than just one really good weapon, and once you have it, I mean, that's it. That was the issue with fixed rolls back in the day. I mean, once you had it, the game left you wanting more. Similarly, only a few select weapons with what you'd call good quality leaves you wanting more in that same fashion. Now in a season I'd say that's more acceptable, but from a main expansion like Beyond Light lacking in that aspect, it's a tough pill to swallow as someone who wants to see the game at its best. Just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, these two aren't mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand, and there has to be a minimum acceptable level for either to be in place, and there isn't any right answer as to which one is more important to the game. My point is that the quantity of Destiny's Sandbox is diminished by the poor quality of weapons they create. Across the board, the different weapon classes and subtypes should perform statistically more similar to one another, as well as having the potential to be great with more ideal selections of possible roles. This would help boost the amount of viable weapons in both the PvE and PvP landscape, and create a more fleshed out experience for the entire Destiny community. What's crazy is, I haven't even touched on another issue related to this, and that's the perk balance, but I'll save that for another video maybe, because there's a lot there too. So that's it for me chatting. I'm really interested in hearing what you think about what I said, as well as how you feel about the question. Which is more important, the quality of the weapons or the quantity of them? Let me know down in the comment section, and thanks for watching guys. Peace.